Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 goats to have ever goated, the one that they call Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Cameron. Yeah. August break, got lots going on actually in our August break. It's no break at all, but anyway, it is the August break. So I hope everybody's having fun.
How do you ingest August break, Peter? Is it something that you look forward to? Do you embrace it, or do you end up missing and yearning for some more F1?
Well, having been raised in Australia, the whole August break thing was kind of something I never really understood at all. I remember when Peter Collins and I first came over to England in the early 70s, we drove down in my Mark One Escort all the way to the south of France to Ricard for the French Grand Prix. And when we were coming back, it was the beginning of the August break. It was late July. And we were absolutely astounded by all these people on the motorway going in one direction with caravans and everything. And we were so astounded that we sort of took pictures of it all. We couldn't work out why everyone was doing exactly the same thing. And the thought of what the beaches must be like, and how many people were sort of jammed onto these beaches, which is something, of course, you don't get in Australia because the beach is there all the time and you just go surfing whenever you want. And there's none of this August break stuff. We never went away. When I was a kid, up until the point I left Australia in my 20s, I didn't, early 20, actually 19. I didn't go on one holiday because we just stayed at home. Why wouldn't you? We had the harbour, we had the yacht, we had the little boat, not a yacht. We had the surf beach, we had the walks. Why would you go on holiday? So the whole thing I still kind of feel the same way about it now. I actually enjoy August breaks when I lived in England because everybody left town and it was easy to get everything done. And here in Spain, it's a similar story, actually. Yeah, so good.
I mean, I would say that I wasn't jealous, Peter, but that would be a lie far too early on in the
I'm
podcast.
only
But
speaking from my perspective. I thought that was the same for everybody in the world when I was a kid
oh,
growing up. What's all this
oh.
holiday business? You don't want holidays. Pain in the neck.
Peter, let's talk about some Hungarian Grand
And just to
Prix.
finish it, that's probably why
Of
I got on
course.
so well with Frank Williams, because he felt the same way about holidays. We used to talk
Yeah.
about it quite a lot when we were running around Austria or Hockenheim, wherever it was.
Mm. Go on then, Peter. Let's talk
Mm.
about some Hungarian Grand Prix as is customary.
Yeah.
What's the one thing that you think was the biggest story to come out of the
Oh,
Hungarian Grand Prix?
undoubtedly that McLaren are back with a very, very good upgrade on that car with the floor that I don't know. Why didn't they have that floor on the car at the start of the year? That's about the only thing you can say. They've got everything right on that car now, and they're right back to where they should have been at the start of the year and where they left off last year.
Yeah.
What's been going on the last 6 months? You have to ask. But then again, okay, what's done is done, and McLaren now have a very, very good race car. Too late in terms of the 2026 championship because it's not as if the Mercedes is going to be horrendous in the second half of the year, but it's going to be a lot more fruity, I think, the racing in the second half. And all credit to Rob Marshall, to Pete Prod, to the whole team at McLaren to have got that upgrade to work. When you think of how hard everybody works, as we're all constantly being told by all the teams, and specifically if you think about Red Bull and how many upgrades they've thrown at that car, McLaren have got it right, and Red Bull's still throwing upgrades and they're not really producing anything. So this whole business of, oh, it's an upgrade, it should produce a result, is completely wrong, of course, as it always has been in Formula One. It's suck it and see. And because we don't have any testing, it's even more difficult than it ever was before. Obviously, computer simulation is there, but a lot of it obviously doesn't count for very much.
You said, Mr. Windsor, that it's too late. Lando Norris is circa 100, but just less than 100 points adrift of Kimi Antonelli in the championship. This time last year, I think Max Verstappen was 102 points. Do you really think it's too late for Lando Norris to mount a challenge for the championship?
Yeah, I do, because as I say, it'd be one thing if Mercedes was suddenly horrendous, but they're not. They've still got a very, very good car, and it'll be a better car going forward as well. And whilst I don't think the McLaren upgrades are circuit specific, in other words, I think that'll work for them everywhere. I do think that in Mercedes' case, that maybe was a little bit circuit specific, Hungary, and take them to Zandvoort, take them to Monza, take them to Singapore, wherever you want to take them, Baku, they're going to be good.
Yeah, yeah. You can't see them going backwards.
No,
They'll improve.
no.
And
I mean, the only thing would be reliability, but if it's reliability, it should also affect McLaren, because let's face it, they're a Mercedes customer team, and they did actually have that failure yesterday on Oscar's car anyway.
yeah, Yeah, good shout.
I think the second transmission issue they've had this year.
I mean, they've had a few. That McLaren has been horrendous as far as Riley. But you remember Australia, they're DNS'd,
Yeah,
both
yeah.
of them.
Yeah,
So,
but at a time in Formula One's history when transmission issues are quite rare, McLaren have had two already. I think I'm correct in saying I don't know if we know exactly what happened to Lando's car in where was it, Canada, but I think it was transmission.
yeah, yeah. As well, Peter, I'm quoting Andrea Stella here, but he was quite ardent in defending their development or lack of development season to date by saying, well, this is what happens when you compete tooth and nail in a championship the previous year with a Max Verstappen, that you can't all of a sudden down tools and think about 2026 the next year.
Yeah, I guess so. I thought it'd be more logical to say, well, not more logical. I mean, what he's saying is obviously correct from his perspective and correct from his point of view, from his management position in the team. But the way it looks to me is that McLaren don't just throw everything at the car in a sort of quick, rapid response way. They think it through and do it in a very organized way. And I think Rob Marshall should take a lot of credit for that. And I think that's what's happened. But the question, I mean, if you follow Stella's line of thinking, you're basically saying, well, we started the year with last year's car because we didn't have time to develop it, and now we're starting to throw development items at it. But if that's the case, why was it so bad? You know, it shouldn't have been that bad. I don't think that's the case. I think they started with a modified version of last year's car, and the modifications went in the wrong direction.
Yeah, yeah, and that
And
this
a
is them
completely
changing.
different car anyway. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's kind of all moot, isn't it?
yeah. This is them changing
Yeah.
design philosophy direction. Peter, I wanted to ask you
Mm.
about Lando because again, I've come in for a lot of flack saying very mean things about Lando. That last year he was lucky to be a champion. But some Lando Norris fans say that this year has been his best season, better than his championship winning season. That he's driving at a level that's befitting of a champion now. What did you make of him at the Hungarian Grand Prix? I mean, he was blitzkrieg quick all race weekend long. The qualifying was incredible. FP3s, he's doing quicker laps than anybody on 6 lap old soft compound tyres. Do you think that Lando Norris has proven himself this year to be a champion level driver more than he could ever, or more than he did last year?
Well, I haven't really moved from my position last year after he won the championship, which was to say that I felt in 2026 Lando would be vulnerable to Oscar because as world champion now, a massive weight is off his shoulders. And he will just be enjoying life, enjoying driving. And when the car is good, he'll probably drive better than ever. And he will look fabulous in the car. But when the car is not so good, he won't be that fussed about it and maybe wouldn't work as hard as working hard is the wrong way to put it, wouldn't get as much out of the car as, say, Max would get out of a bad car,
Mm,
or Charles or Lewis would maybe get out of a bad car. My feeling was always that we're going to see the best of Lando this year, providing the car's good. And I think that's exactly what we saw in Hungary. We saw him getting to that new height of, wow, I'm world champion. I love this circuit. The car's brilliant. Isn't it wonderful? I'm going to get on and win this Grand Prix. And that's exactly what we saw. All the pressure's off him, nothing to prove, loving life. But but in answer to your question, is he a true world champion? For me, a true world champion should always be judged on how well they drive a bad car and what they get out of a bad car. And that's where you see, that's where you see the Lewises and the Maxes and the Michaels and many other drivers. I mean, Jim Clark's an obvious example, Jackie Stewart another, and Jochen Rindt. Those guys know how to drive a bad car very well. And it's no disrespect to Lando. Fair enough. He's won his championship and he's enjoying life and he's getting better and better in a good car and driving it beautifully. Let's just enjoy that without having to worry about how he stacks up against Jochen Rindt, for example.
yeah. That's a very good shout. What did you make of the papaya rules at the Hungarian Grand Prix? Because I couldn't help but feel bad for Oscar, notwithstanding the fact that he didn't have the pace on Lando, for the way that McLaren handled the Carlos Sainz incident, right? Comes together with Carlos Sainz. Carlos isn't checking his mirrors, and then Oscar says over the radio, "Don't even talk to me again. I thanks for putting me in this situation." Feels very reminiscent, Peter, of Monza last year, amongst others, right? There was Oscar right to feel as aggrieved as he did.
Well, reminiscent of Singapore, actually, his attitude after the Singapore, what he felt was a slight there when the team didn't ask Lando to give him back that position after the start. And he said, "Don't talk to me anymore." So
Mm.
reminiscent of that. Papaya rules. I mean, there weren't any papaya rules, were there? Obviously not, because he was allowed to take the lead on the first lap and pass Lando and lead the Grand Prix in a very good car. So what rules are we talking about? I think, again, that's an internet thing. To McLaren's credit, they allowed both drivers to race. Oscar got a bit of a boost because of the penalties. Lando knew he was there right behind him, did the right thing. Oscar's all fired up, lets him go. Gets dirty tires. Temperatures go a little bit high in the first stint or two, but Lando was right there. Never really stopped filling his mirrors, and did a great job. Now, from Oscar's point of view, he was allowed to race. He was given a great race car. He was on the second row of the grid. He was on the clean side of the road. Made a great start. Led the race 2 stints, and came in actually a little bit later than McLaren wanted, because the lap he was supposed to come in, I think that was when Bottas's Cadillac filled up the pit lane. So he did one more lap, I mean, which is indicative that the rear tires had gone, which is the way he drives the car anyway. And so where's the complaint? You know, they brought him in. Lando got 7 laps more out of that set of tires, was a second a lap quicker the minute Oscar disappeared. And his only gripe was, I think, as I understand it, was that they didn't anticipate the amount of traffic that he would have when he rejoined, and as a result, he got clouted by a wayward Carlos Sainz, and he was blaming the team for that. But in reality, you know, if that hadn't been skewed by the Bottas thing, he probably would have been okay. I mean, teams are pretty good these days at making sure they don't bring their cars out in traffic. But if your tires are gone, your tires are gone, and you're coming in and you've already done one extra lap, you can't really blame the team for that. So I'm surprised that he did that. You know, the laconic Frank Gardner Australian should have just been a one-liner like "thanks guys" or something like that, and then just get on, put your head down, and enjoy the race in a very good racing car. Sadly, he couldn't, because he didn't finish. And I suspect, looking back, I hope that's how he looks at the race. If he takes this away now into the August break, "Oh, there's no chance at McLaren. They're always going to favour Lando, papaya rules, whatever they want to talk about," then it'll eat away at him, and that's going to be sad to see, because it's not the case. You know, they gave him, they allowed him to race. What papaya rules are we talking about? You know, I don't think there was any discussion on the pit wall at McLaren saying, "Look, you know, we got to stop Oscar winning this race. Let's bring him in 7 laps earlier than Lando. That'll screw him." Do you think that conversation took place? I
Oh,
don't think
no,
so, you know.
no.
So that would be papaya rules, but nothing else like remotely near that happened. You know, Oscar drove well. He had fun. He led the race. Very good race car. He's going to have a very good race car for the rest of the year. Enjoy it. Sit back and relax. Beat Lando. That's your objective now. Out qualify him every race and get in front of him in every race. Prove that you can do it, and look after your tires.
Surely, though, Peter,
Hmm.
Oscar, you can forgive Oscar for on the back of a Monza and a Singapore. You can forgive Oscar for doing the F1 apophonia thing and connecting causation dots that should be connected. I can just imagine that Oscar would be absolutely fuming, feeling like the racing gods and McLaren and Lando Norris are conspiring
But
against
what
him now.
aspect of what I just said would make him fuming? I don't understand that.
I think he would be. So again, even considering the blue flag situation and that they were messing up and they didn't have a track map properly, I think Oscar will be. I can forgive Oscar for thinking had the roles been reversed, that they wouldn't have put Lando Norris in a similar position
Well, what do you mean
because
by
that.
similar position? They wouldn't have put him where the traffic was, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, he's not the only driver in the world ever to been released into
Oh,
traffic
100%.
when the
Yeah, I
tires have
agree.
gone off. I mean, no, if that's his gripe, that McLaren's strategy is not very good or the GPS isn't working well enough, then you know he needs to get a life. I don't think it's that. I can't be that unless if it is that, then he's got a problem, and everybody who thinks the same way's got a problem, because no team is perfect. I mean, if he thinks that's terrible, he should go and drive for Ferrari and see what happens there. You know, um, lucky to have any. He's lucky to have a radio at all, bearing in mind how difficult it is with the Lewis thing. Trying to get
Oh,
communication with Ferrari with Lewis. So to me, it's all just. It's a lot of people out there who want Oscar to win every race or beat Lando in every
this
race,
is
and
true.
they're just all
Yeah.
whining about. Whinging's the wrong word, but they're whining about something that was imperfect. But no race is perfect, and no call is perfect, and you make the most of it. And we now know that he could have come in a lap earlier and he wouldn't have had that traffic.
Yeah.
But he didn't come
Yeah.
in because of the Bottas thing, as I keep saying.
Yeah. I just feel I can't help but feel sorry for Oscar. And again, I don't think there was any. There's no. I mean, mens rea you can debate. Actus rea, there's none of that in there. I don't think McLaren would do
Well,
would
yeah,
do anything to harm his
and you use the
chances.
phrase Cameron feel sorry. Why do you feel sorry for him? I mean, he's in a great racing team, in a
Mm,
great racing car with a really cool teammate. I mean, he could be in a much worse situation. Could be much worse. If he'd taken my advice and stayed at Alpine for a year and gone to Mercedes, he could be up against Kimi Antonelli for Pete's sake.
wow, insane.
You know,
Yeah.
or
Mm,
maybe he'd still be at Alpine. I don't know, but that was my advice. I felt if he'd done 1 year at Alpine, he probably would have gone to Mercedes or Ferrari. And would that be better than where he is? I'm not sure it would. I think he's in a great team. And the more he thinks that he's not, the worse it's going to get. He needs to realize how good McLaren are as a race team. Well, more importantly, how good that racing car is now. And to get the best from the team and everybody with whom he works, he needs to be very calm, and he'll be Mr. Nice Guy. I hope that's what Oscar is, and he's a great guy, and I hope he does that because he will win races the second half of this year for sure if he
yeah.
just calms down and lets it happen. Because there'll be moments when Lando gets it wrong, and we saw that yesterday. Lando makes a lot of mistakes with his driving compared with say Max or Kimi or Charles in a race situation. Lando's
Uh,
vulnerable and he's beatable. He's
mm,
he's absolutely capable of touching the sky when he's in a great car with all that weight off his shoulders, as I said earlier. But he's definitely a target, and that's why I always said at the start of the year I felt Oscar would definitely do Lando this year because Lando is vulnerable when things aren't going quite as well as they should, and that's
yeah.
where Oscar needs to be ready. And
Yeah.
it's still a bit, I mean, for Oscar fans out there, and I would like to include myself in that, I found it very dispiriting that he was as hard on tires as he was, even though he had a clean road in front of him, and is still turning in pretty late. And as we heard from the radio, loading up the rear on the curbs quite a lot. What's that all about? He used to turn in with the front of the car and get a nice early entry rather. And he's not doing that. He's still not doing that.
Mm,
I was shocked when Tom Stallard said to him, one area where you can improve Oscar is, sorry, one area where you can get an advantage over Lando is turn 5 because Lando's much wider through that corner or something. And I immediately looked at it and there's no way Lando was wider through turn 5. I don't know what Tom was looking at, maybe some sort of not numerical thing or something. But if you actually look at the corner, Lando was turning in maybe a meter earlier than Oscar regularly into turn 5. So,
mm.
so a lot of that is spurious information around which he's judging his driving, I think. I'm not saying it's Tom specifically. I'm just saying it's when you look at digits and numbers and telemetry, often it can be very misleading. And I just wish Oscar would go back to being Oscar Piastri, driving the racing car in a very fluid, soft, supple way that he did when he first came to McLaren, and just use the front of the car much more instead of driving on the rear all the time.
Interesting. Interesting, Peter.
But I don't
Do you
feel
think
sorry for him because he's in a great. Nobody should feel sorry for Oscar Piastri. He's in a brilliant race team with a brilliant race car beneath him.
you
Any more than you should feel sorry for George Russell.
no, you are you make a sound point, Peter. I just imagine that high level sports athletes, very superstitious by nature, that the paranoia in Oscar Piastri's head will be on level
Well, that's the
10,000.
sign. That is the sign of a champion or a potential champion. Is not to worry about all that rubbish and not to
Mm,
let that come into your thinking, because it's all rubbish, isn't it?
yeah.
Superstition and all this innuendo in the team. Are they favouring me? Are they not favouring me? That's why Fernando never won a world championship at McLaren or Ferrari, because he kept thinking that the other side of the garage were against him. You know, and it's an insidious thing, and it never works. Look
Well,
at
well,
Nigel
well,
Mansell. He never worried about that. He knew. He just went into every race thinking he was in a the negative situation. The other guy was getting the treatment, never moaned about it, just got on with it and beat him. That's what you do. It's the Mark Webber thing, not bad for the other side of the garage. And that's what Oscar needs to have, that
Yeah,
Mark Webber attitude. And Mark being with him, hopefully Mark will instill that.
yeah,
Because I
blimey.
can tell you now, complaining about it's going to make it worse. And moaning about it and telling Tom not to talk to him is going to make it worse.
Fingers crossed, Oscar. We're rooting for you, chap, but it's
Well, I'm rooting
yeah.
for McLaren for the job they're doing.
Yeah,
I'm also rooting for Lando because I love the way he drives. I
yeah.
love the way that the soft, fluid rhythms that he can get into. I still wish he'd use the front end of the car more, but that's never going to happen. So you just enjoy him for what he is.
He was very good. Let me talk to you about Max Verstappen
Mm.
because some have said, Peter, that he's lost his touch, that he's washed,
Who said that? Come on.
that he's an Adrian
There's
Newey
only got to
fast
be one
car
or two
merchant.
people stupid enough in the world to have said that. Who are they? We must know who they are.
I couldn't say names. That he's washed, that he's lost his
Yeah,
touch,
come
that he's
on.
a front runner.
This is just a classic Cameron winding Windsor up build up.
You've got to put forth the antithesis case, Peter.
Well, I'm not going to
Yesterday,
because it's such nonsense. There's no point in even responding to that.
don't indulge it. Peter, how good was his performance yesterday?
Oh, absolutely as good as anything Max has ever done in an unwieldy car. Well, it's not strictly true. I mean, well, let me rephrase it. Often we'd look at how good Max looked alongside Sonoda or on occasion Perez and Lawson. Next to Hadjar, of course, it's not quite as impressive as it was next to, say, you know, Yuki. And that's because Hadjar's very good as well. Very, very good. And so that needs to be borne in mind. But I still, there's no doubt that car is a real dog. Well, sorry, Dexter, that's not correct. I mean, it's nothing like as good as Dexter probably in terms of its dexterity. It's it's all over the place. And the biggest problem for them, as far as I could see, was and listen to was that they've got this horrendous issue still with the power unit, which showed up when they had to harness nine instead of 8.5 in the race. And Max was just sitting there at the end of the pit straight for 2-3 seconds with the engine just going nowhere, losing speed long before the braking area. And that was the only power unit in Hungary in which that applied. And when you've got that, it's very difficult to set the car up for the race and have a great compromise because the goalposts are changing anyway on Sunday. So he didn't have a great car in qualifying. He didn't have a great car in the race. And I thought it was all summed up by, when GP got on the radio and said, we're thinking about softs for the third set. And what do you think? And he said, well, car's hopeless on mediums, hopeless on hards. You might as well go for softs. I don't care, do whatever. And that's, if Max is saying that, it's not because he's trying to make out how bad the car is. He's just saying that because it's the truth. And everything Max says is basically the truth because he's not worried about politics. He's not worried about money. He's not worried about fame. He's not worried about glory. He's just talking about the race car on the lap. That's what Max is all about. And when he says that, it's true. And so that doesn't say much about the car, does it? And yet in that car, he not only finished second, but he was super quick with pressure behind him, particularly from Lewis in a much better car, superior tyres at that point. Lewis all over him, having passed Lewis with a great Max overtake. Lewis all over him, and he immediately adjusts his way of driving and turns in a bit later just to make sure he gets all the exits really clean, and doesn't give Lewis any chance. And there's no way Lewis is ever going to try it inside Max going into a corner. So Max knew that straight away. So the only thing he was thinking about was the exits, and he did it perfectly. And on the softs, when he started to get understeer, it was just like, okay, we're going to Patient City, Arizona here, and we'll just sit there with understeer. I'm not going to put any throttle and let the car do its thing, and then I'll get going. And it worked perfectly. And everybody else, guess what, got understeer, and they were all doing the same thing. And that's the beauty of Max. He's not colored by anything. And you can only drive as well as he's driving in a bad car. Lando, take note. I'm not saying that Lando's hopeless in a bad car, but I can't imagine a McLaren in that situation, Lando getting getting out of it what we saw Max getting out of it. And you can only do that if you're not in any way encumbered by all the things I just mentioned. The ego, the politics, the fame, the glory, the money. If none of that means anything to you, and the only thing that's important in your life is feeling the surface of the road and managing the dynamic weights and making sure that all your inputs are harmonized with the car. That's the only thing you get up out of bed for. Then you drive as well as Max Verstappen. And it's very difficult at that level to get rid of all that other crud, the money and the power and the is Joss a good bloke and should they have fired Christian and all that rubbish. None of it is in there in Max's brain. And that's the beauty of it all. And that to some extent, I think, takes us back to the Oscar Piastri thing. The more people talk about Oscar to his face, probably saying, "Oh, Oscar, what are you going to do? You're getting screwed at McLaren." The more it's going to penetrate, and he needs to look at Max and the way Max does it. It's just like, don't want to know about it. Not interested. I just want to drive this car with understeer. How do I drive this car with understeer and look after the tires and beat everybody?
Hmm.
That's what it's all about. And Max, to me, was a case study. If you want a definition of a world champion, it was Max Verstappen in Hungary yesterday. Absolutely brilliant.
He's still very pure, isn't he, Peter?
Completely pure in that internal thing that I've just been talking about. Yeah.
So the singularity of focus is like
Singularity of
is
focus. That's a lovely phrase, Cameron. Yeah.
yeah.
Good.
I've stolen that from somebody. I must have. It's far too good, Peter. I want to ask you about
Well,
the
Jim Clark
overtake.
just called it concentration.
Yeah,
Same thing, simple
yeah,
word.
yeah. Talk to me about the overtake on Lewis. Again, splitting the community. Lewis Hamilton fans say that that's outrageous. Max Verstappen being a terrorist again and dive bombing Lewis's inside. Some say it's a brilliant maneuver. Lewis, again, we'll double click on Lewis from from Lewis's POV. But where do you stand on that, Peter? Brilliant move or
Yeah, of course it
terrorism?
was a brilliant move. There's lots of room there. I mean, if you did that into the tight left-right section in Baku, yeah, you could maybe get a bit upset with Max, but there's lots of room there. As we saw Lewis mid-corners turning the steering wheel to the left. Just think about when Piastri dived on the field. Was it the year before, 2 years before, at that first corner off the start? Everybody just had to move to the left, Lando, Max, and created room for Oscar. It's turn one in Hungary is it's lots of room. What can you say? I think Lewis is a bit not unsighted. It's the wrong word, but I mean, he just had that pass on Liam, wasn't he? And Liam was quite near him in his peripheral vision, and I guess he just never imagined that Max would go down the inside like that. Because
But
I mean, Lewis quite rightly feeling that he had the quicker car and he had the pace on Max anyway, so there was no way Max was going to do that, and he just passed Liam, and he was going to try and, I guess he was maybe thinking, get Liam between me and Max might be a good thing, but um, I just think he got a little bit lazy. Not lazy is the wrong word. I think he just just never imagined that Max would do that. And Max did, and he did it perfectly, absolutely perfectly, perfect braking. If he'd locked up and run wide, it would have been a different thing. But he didn't. He did it absolutely perfect. He just saw an opportunity and went Zach. It's like Mika Hakkinen with Michael at Spa with Ricardo
mm,
Zonta. You don't think about it. It just happens, and you go. You're a racer, and you do it. And he did perfectly. A bit like Oscar, actually, really, on turn two with Lando. I don't think that
yeah,
was planned. It was just like, oh, he's running a bit wide here, bang, go. And that's what racers do. And I think, from Ferrari's point of view, that was pretty shocking, wasn't it? Because they'd worked hard, Lewis had worked hard to get track position with the undercut, and uh, they had it, and it worked
Peter, can I double click on that for a
until Max
second?
passed him.
Yeah, go on then. Let's
Mm.
talk about the move from Lewis Hamilton's POV because again, we both lived through peak Lewis Hamilton and the story of 2026. Some might say is the resurgence of Lewis. That he looks like he not quite prime, but he's driving brilliantly well and he looks really happy and he's winning races in a red car with a yellow badge and a black prancing course atop. How then is Lewis Hamilton as a seven-time champion? How do you not expect Max Verstappen to dive bomb up your inside, given what happened in 2021, given how many races you've raced with him and how many times you've had your lunch money stolen by Max on similar moves? How does Lewis not expect Max Verstappen, a shark smelling blood? How do you not expect Max Verstappen to try a dive bomb up there?
Well, he doesn't, and he didn't. And regardless of how successful Lewis had been, had he gone, I don't know, to Ferrari after 2021 21, or even if it had a great period and won a lot of races between 21 and now, I think he still would have been vulnerable to Max yesterday, because that's always been the difference between the two of them. Lewis doesn't do that sort of thing, generally speaking. He pulls off some great passes, but quite a lot of them are on the outside, and he's very good when the it's a DRS pass and he does it in the right moments, really good. But that sort of opportune bomb thing is a Max thing. It's not a Lewis thing, and it never has been. So from that point of view, it's not a surprise, but that doesn't mean anything really. I mean, quite often you hear teams saying, "Well, we're not surprised, we're slow here." I mean, as if that's an explanation. It's not. And what we should be saying is, well, should Lewis start to be doing a little bit more of what Max is doing? Well, I would say, given the number of penalties that are being thrown at Lewis for basically doing nothing wrong at all, that if he starts doing some dive bombing, it's going to be even worse for him. So he better just stay put at the moment. That was an unusual thing. Let's face it, there aren't that many corners in Formula One these days where you can do what Max did at turn 1 in Hungary. And I mean, you couldn't do that into 14. You couldn't do that into 5. You can only do it maybe into 2, but it's a different sort of corner. One is one in Hungary, and Max just drove it as you normally would drive it. I mean, we've seen Piquet doing that. We've seen lots of other drivers doing that. Nigel was brilliant there. Michael was brilliant there into turn 1. So it's not as if Max is doing anything particularly unusual. It's just that Lewis is an incredibly clean, great racing driver, but because of that, for a guy like Max, Lewis is quite predictable. And now, would Lewis have done that to Charles Leclerc? That's the real question, I think. And I'm not convinced that he would, because Charles would be very aggressive if he saw Max trying to do something like that. But then again, I don't think Charles would even have left any sort of gap for Max there. I think that's the difference. And that's not a slight on Lewis. Lewis is much better than Charles in other areas and much better than Max in other areas. They're all different. But that's one of Lewis's obvious vulnerable spots. And Max has known that for years, and he just exploited it again on a corner where it was exploitable. So it was that.
Are we concluding
in a way, you again have to put the blame back on a Ferrari, or if you've got a really switched on race engineer, you're saying to Lewis, you got Max there, be very careful into 1. That's the one place where he might get you, Lewis. Did you hear that radio message to Lewis?
Negative.
I didn't know. And that's the issue. And he was, he just passed Lawson. It was all a bit messy, but it was no excuse really, because Lewis is in a much better car. So
are we concluding then, Peter, that Lewis still doesn't know how to race Max Verstappen?
Well, no, I think that's taking it a step further from where I was coming from, which was on specific corners, which are quite wide and you can get away with it. Max is always going to be the guy. If you leave him half an inch, he's going to make it 2 feet and he's going to go for it. But there aren't that many corners in Formula One where that applies. I mean, the Copse thing was slightly different because it was still coldish tires, and it's a wide corner again. You can get away with that, but it was a little bit of a bridge too far, I think, for Lewis, and I think he chose the wrong place there. But for me, it's just, if every corner was like turn 1, I think Lewis would be a different driver. Turn 1 in Hungary, Lewis would be a different racing driver, but they're not. How many corners like turn 1 do we know? The hairpin at Austin's pretty big, pretty wide. The hairpin at Suzuka's got quite a lot of grip on the outside, but they're not really places where you can do a pass from a long straight. Well, so in Austin you could, Austin would be another place where if you're Lewis and you got Max behind you, you'd be thinking he's going to do something into here. That would be another place. I can't think of many others like that. And I think on most corners, Max is, just like everybody else, isn't he? He'll only do it if it's an obvious gap.
I don't know if I'd characterize it the same way, Peter. I think he's always been a shark. I thought you were
going to say Lewis has always been a wimp, is what I thought you were going to say.
No,
you're going to get the other way.
Lewis
Max has always been a shark? No, I don't agree with that.
You know, I think a shark in the sense that if there is a whiff, if you leave him a gap up the
Yeah,
inside, then he'll
obviously.
always dive
But
bomb
we're
it.
talking about if you don't leave him a gap and he creates a gap. That's what he did yesterday. In Lewis's mind, he didn't leave room for Max there. In Lewis's
Mm,
mind, he'd covered that by being more or less right of center. And yet Max still did it. And my point is that's because it's turn one in Hungary and there's a lot of room there and you can get away with that. And Max did that correctly, absolutely correct. And Lewis didn't anticipate that.
which boggles my mind, Peter. I still can't plug that gap.
Yeah,
That
it's just
Lewis is so
perfection by
good.
Max. It's perfection by Max on the pass. And because Lewis would never do that pass, I think if you only
Wasn't
look at
expecting from that.
at Formula One through the eyes of Lewis Hamilton, you'd say, "Oh, that's a terrible pass. He shouldn't have done that." But he did, and it was perfect. What was
Mm.
terrible about it? I can't think of one thing that was terrible. And I thought it was quite funny, actually, that Max got immediately on the radio to start saying, "Oh, Lewis moved
He's
under braking."
moved.
Now, of course, that's nonsense, but the reality is he did that to deflect anybody that might be saying, "Oh, that was a terrible move by
Yeah.
Max. He should be penalised." You know, that was all that was. So at least Max is, in that sense, he's politically adept. It's not
He's
politics, really, isn't it? It's just using the rules absolutely to the maximum. It's like saying, Kimi uses more road on fast corners, but he uses more road, but he uses the perfect amount of road. He doesn't use too much road. That's the point. And it's the same with
Mm.
Max. It's perfection. And when you see that doing something that Lewis wouldn't do, you immediately think, oh well, that makes Max a bit of a villain. But it's not that. He's just perfect
I
in
mean, they
that for
did it.
that maneuver. I don't mean perfect overall as a person or as a
Mm-mm.
driver. Please don't misquote me on that.
No, it was a really good maneuver. I mean, they didn't touch, did they? What are we doing here, Peter? Playing tiddlywinks, or are we racing
Yeah,
F1 cars?
and to the stewards' credit, they didn't take any action. Good on
No.
them, and because there's
S-
nothing needed to be taken there.
Speaking of stewards' actions, Peter,
Yes.
um, Lewis Hamilton, is he a victim of inconsistent stewarding? Again, gets another penalty, goes 1.1 kilometer per hour over the pit lane speed limit. Um, or is a penalty a penalty a penalty?
Well, you're talking to a guy that doesn't believe in this whole penalty rule book system anyway. So in that sense, I think he is a victim, but no more than say Kimi Antonelli recently's been a victim, um, or indeed Charles Leclerc's got away with it. So in that sense, he is. In the sense of, I think, yeah, it wasn't his fault because all the drivers these days rely on radio transmissions from the team to tell them about traffic. And it's interesting how often GP talks over Max when Max is finishing a lap and he wants to talk about how
Mm.
terrible the car is. And GP immediately says +3 Gasly or whatever, just completely talks over his head to make Max move to the right, even though he's just got over the start finish line and qualified, whatever. He's immediately on the case. But that didn't happen with Lewis. He finished his qualifying lap, and the next thing we hear or see is Piastri zapping past, and there's no reference at all. And that's not Lewis's fault because they should be much more on the case at Ferrari, and they should be saying the minute Lewis crosses the start finish line, it should have been Piastri's on a push lap, move over. But there was none of that. So but it's Lewis that gets the penalty. Obviously, has to bear the brunt of the penalty by the grid position thing, and losing a grid position or 3 grid positions in Hungary is a huge penalty around Hungary. From the point of view of potentially being on the wrong side of the road, he wasn't in this case. He's still on the clean side, but of how difficult it is to overtake and earn position in Hungary, that was a huge thing. So that's Ferrari, and I think it was a correct penalty because Piastri lost his lap and ironically ended up, effectively P3. Well, he was P3 on the grid, and that worked out for him. Um, but Ferrari need to get their act together there. It seems to me that there's just the communication pace between Lewis and what's his name,
Santi,
Santi,
Carlos.
between Lewis and Carlos Santi is much too slow. There's nothing, nothing edgy about it. And a couple of times Lewis has to ask the same question 2 or 3 times to get any response. And that, you can't have that. If you look at the best driver engineer, or two of the best in Formula One driver engineer relationships on the radio. It's got to be Max with GP, and it's got to be Kimi with Bono, isn't it? And
Mm.
everything there is boom, 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 boom,
It's
as it should
instant.
be. But it's not with Lewis. There's much too much slack there, and you can see the frustration in his voice. And did you hear the interplay at the end of FP3 when he was doing the practice start? And they said, okay, Lewis,
Mm.
3 burnouts or whatever, start on the right. And Lewis immediately says, how many practice starts are we doing? Quite quickly, like that, and no response at all. And they say, on the right, 3. And he says, no, how many practice starts are we doing? And he says,
Mm.
only 1, Lewis. He said, in that case, I'm going to start on the left. Which was indicative of Lewis starting to take control of everything, which is right, because he did start on the left.
Mm.
And secondly, slightly, not more than slightly, very slow reactions from Carlos to what Lewis wanted to know. And Lewis was absolutely correct. If he wants to start on the left, do that.
Yeah.
Do the practice
Yeah.
start on the left. And they need to tighten that up. It's much better with Charles and Brian, I think. That's a much more harmonious bang, bang, bang thing. And it works quite well now for those two. But that whole Lewis thing, I mean, to some extent, the whole penalty was just the lack of communication. But then, the 80.1, you can't split hairs. You're either over it or you're not. And if you are, and he was the only one that was over 80, if there were 5 drivers 0.1 over, again, if you're Ferrari, you'd be saying, well, stuff that. We're not going to serve that penalty. We'll do it after the race, after Monaco. But he seemed to be the only one. I think they got a speeding fine yesterday in the pit lane, so you've got to take that on board. But then, of course, on top of that, you had the business of the passing before the safety car line and having to go that's slack. I mean, what is that again? Maybe a Bono would have been on the radio saying, "Be very careful, safety car line. You've got Kimi on your outside. Make sure you don't pass him before." Maybe Bono would be doing that, and he's not. And Lewis is not getting that at Ferrari.
Yeah.
And Lewis is
Yeah.
the sort of guy that I think, if you give him that sort of framework, I think he's fine with that. It seems like they're absolutely, at issue with how to handle Lewis and what to tell him, what not to tell him. Should he be told about the penalty? This and that. They're sort of treading
Mm.
on ice all the time with Lewis, or hot coals, better. It's a better analogy. But that's wrong. They give Lewis the information he needs quickly, and let him get on with it.
Peter, what do you make about some said that if Ferrari were being fair, Lewis being ahead in the drivers' standings as versus Charles, that what they should have done is tell Charles to chill out, mate. Lewis has got a 5-second penalty and he's leading the championship. So what are you doing here? Instead, Charles Leclerc makes sure that he's less than 5 seconds adrift of Lewis Hamilton and gains himself an extra 2 points. What do you make of that, Peter?
Complete nonsense. Anybody that's thinking of the World Championship midway through the year doesn't know what they're doing. If already Charles was out of the championship mathematically and Lewis had a chance of winning it or maybe finishing second or something, maybe you would do that. But midway through the year, give me a break. That's nonsense.
So some say that championships have been lost by less than 2 points, though, right, Peter? And you got to at some point you've got to pick a side now.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Which is why you don't want to keep getting penalties if you lose Hamilton.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the point. But you can't start when it's a penalty thing, particularly. You can't at this stage of the year expect the other driver suddenly to slow down. That's crazy. No, I
Yeah.
mean that's thinking about the World Championship gone completely skew, and it's not the right way to think at all.
Just to loop the circle, Peter, on
Mm.
the penalties. I was interested to hear what Lou said after the fact,
Hmm.
and I quote him as saying, "The last 3 races, there have been some mistakes that have been very costly. There are mistakes that these are the type of the mistakes that lose championships." He continues, "I keep giving the FIA chances to. If I keep giving the FIA chances to penalise me, then I won't be winning anything." Is Lewis alluding to the fact that he thinks that he's been victimised again by the FIA?
I don't think so. No, I think he's saying we don't know if every potential infringement is going to result in a penalty, but I've got to stop putting myself in a position where they can even make a decision about that and have no more of this nonsense. And as I said, I don't think he deserved the penalty in Spa, and I stand by that. And I think that fits in with the way it went there. But because they gave the penalty to Lewis, I suppose you could then say, well, they should have given one to Charles. But I don't think Lewis would have got that. That's the first thing. I think that was all a function of the ridiculous, regulations we have this year, and on all the speed differentials going down the Kemmel Straight, going up the Kemmel Straight. And I think all the other stuff, pit lane speeding definitely is in the control of Ferrari, not so much Lewis, but Ferrari and in the margins they have. Definitely the giving the position back to Kimi is in the control of Lewis Hamilton. But again, coming back to the point, it's the relationship between Lewis and his engineer and getting enough information to be able to respond to that. And I still question the whole business of not letting Lewis know if he does have a penalty, so that he can then think about how he's driving, what he wants to do, and what he might want to do with strategy as well. So yeah, I don't think you should read any more into it than that. I know we've got plenty of other things to talk about, Cameron, but one thing I think I'm surprised that there's not more discussion about how Charles Leclerc managed to make such an appalling start from the front row on soft tires, because the whole basis of the race that Ferrari planned quite clearly was to get in front, the soft tires from the dirty side of the grid, and for Charles to be leading that Grand Prix. And whilst we talk a lot about Lewis and we talk about this and that, the big story at Ferrari, what was Charles Leclerc doing when the lights went out? I mean, Ferrari is historically the best car off the line this year. He's on the soft tires. Oh, he's on the dirty side of the grid. Yeah. And what was Max Verstappen? In a very slow moving, difficult to start Red Bull, so being on the dirty side, sadly, was no excuse on this occasion. So what happened with Charles Leclerc off the line? Just too much wheel spin and blew it. And that was the day gone for Ferrari then, basically. That really messed it up for everybody. Anyway, moving on.
Well, I mean, Peter, though, you make the point that, I mean, are you not? What do you expect from Charles Leclerc at this stage, other than
I expect from Charles
mistakes?
Leclerc a brilliant start alongside Lando down the inside, taking the lead of the Hungarian Grand Prix. That's what I expect.
But he's always got a cheeky mistake in his locker, right though. I mean, if he puts together the 2 race weekends that he has done for the past 2, it's only a matter of time that he's going to make a big mistake, right? Is that not Charles Leclerc at this juncture?
Well, not, yeah, but there's a difference between locking up, maybe running a bit wide, and actually making a
Yeah,
bad start on soft
yeah,
tires in a car as
yeah.
good as a Ferrari off the line. I mean, that's two different things. And I was just shattered that he was so slow off the line. And that was the Ferrari day gone. Because if he'd
Sean,
imagine if he'd got the lead there and Lewis was up to P2, P3,
it's
making a good start as well, imagine how much control Ferrari would have had of
oh
that
yeah,
race then. Different Grand
yeah,
Prix altogether.
100%.
And it all disappeared. And there's not a lot of chat about that. And I felt sorry for Ferrari there. I talk about feeling sorry for people. I felt sorry. I mean, they take this plunge of running their cars on the soft tire, which is great to see, because too many teams just fall into the rhythm of doing the same thing as everybody else. And Ferrari are out there aggressively choosing soft tires, obviously, so that they get the grip off the line. And Charles blows it. That's when I did feel sorry, and I felt sorry for the whole Ferrari team.
So this is where I play the other side of the fence, Peter. I absolutely don't feel sorry for Ferrari, because this is just is this not just Ferrari doing Ferrari things? I think it's our fault for expecting anything different from them. They always seize defeat
But what
from the
was the
jaws of
Ferrari
victory.
thing? How could anybody have predicted that Charles would make a terrible start on a downhill straight in Hungary into turn one on soft tires, bearing in mind how good the Ferrari is off the line and has been all year? Who could possibly have predicted that? So when you
Anybody,
say, oh, this, Ferrari, how can you predict that? All the other things you can predict, but not that.
yeah, like the instance in and of its own merits. I agree with you, Peter.
And
But
and starting on soft didn't hurt them. That wasn't the reason
no,
they had a bad race yesterday. It was nothing to do with that. It was a good tire choice, I think. The problem was Charles off the line. I mean, I say Charles, we don't know. I mean, maybe it was the battery, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. First time we would have seen that on a Ferrari then, if that's the
yeah.
case. But let's say the combination of Charles and his car, why was it so slow? on soft tires on the front row of the grid, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
What an
Apparent
opportunity he had yesterday. And he would have been better in the race with the 8.5 power harvesting for sure. And he would have been right up there.
if I try to defend Charles for a second, apparently Pirelli said that there wouldn't be a massive upside starting on soft, as far as the start's concerned, starting on the soft tires versus
Exactly.
the
We saw how
mediums.
long it went. But at the same
Mm.
time, in order to benefit from being on the soft tire in that stint, he
Gotta
needed
get
to be
in
in front,
100%,
you
100%.
know, and you got every opportunity to be inside Lando and taking the lead there.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all.
I,
That's all. It
I,
may not have been anything to do with Charles. It was all engine management stuff. I don't know. But if you take the package as a whole, that was what messed up Ferrari's day. That start. Terrible.
they make
Maybe he did all
mistakes
his
there.
practice starts on the left and not the right. That's why they wanted Lewis to be on the right, probably, because Charles kept using the left. Maybe it was that.
What will happen if Ferrari, they'll get to Monza and then there'll be a roaring success. It feels like every time we expect them to go really well around a Hungary, somehow they manage to seize defeat from the jaws of victory. But then at another track like Silverstone, when you think they're going to be, that Mercedes is going to cook them, all of a sudden
I
they
think they'll
look
be
like
okay
world
at
beaters.
Monza. I think they've got a pretty good chance of winning the Italian Grand Prix at
You
Monza.
think so?
Yeah, with that rear wing, with the DRS they've got, with it's a pretty good car in a straight line. It's a pretty good car under high speed braking. Yeah, they won't be as good as a McLaren or a Mercedes around the Lesmos, the Scari, Parabolica, but they'll be okay. They'll be okay, I think.
I thought they were low minimum speed turn merchants, Peter. Anytime you've got
Not
a
as I
Monza
see
and
them, no. I think they'll be
yeah,
all right at Monza.
wow.
Well, they are quite good at slow. They're not bad, but I just don't think they've got as much efficient downforce, let's put it that way, as the Mercedes
Yeah.
and the McLaren. And that's where at Monza the trade-off is more. There's a bigger delta with the trade-off. That's all I think is what we're saying.
Yeah. As far as George Russell's concerned, then Peter, if we're
Mm.
talking about Mercedes, who done it for that start? Was that another George Russell error, or do you point the finger at battery deployment as far as Mercedes is concerned?
I would say ultimately it's the 26 regulations, and nobody really understands how it's working even now, halfway through the year, especially at Mercedes, because what I think George did suffer some sort of issue to do with the battery charge and whether having a full battery suddenly makes it more difficult or not. And after Spa, when obviously they got it wrong and he had zero power on the Kimmel Straight, they were presumably trying something else different to make sure that didn't happen again. And whatever they tried, I don't think any of us will really know, other than that it seemed from what Kimi said in the green room afterwards that he got the battery fully charged, which then made it more difficult for him to get the right revs, which just
Yeah.
sounds ridiculously complicated.
Hmm.
I just wish we didn't have this nonsense and we just had a nice V8 there. And it's a question of just being right in the perfect torque position. You just let the clutch go and everybody has a great racing start. But we don't have that. We have all this nonsense and the battery charge and everything else. And it reminds me, actually, it was a Hungarian Grand Prix and it was years ago. And I can't remember who was telling me this now. I think it was one of the chief mechanic, I think, was saying that he was standing on the grid on the days when the mechanics could stand on the grass when the cars went off on the formation lap. And Jensen was driving for BAR at that point and didn't move for about, I don't know, whatever, 10, 15 seconds. And after the race, he said, why were you slow away for the formation lap? And Jensen said, oh, I just had a complete brain fade. Just couldn't remember the sequence of everything I needed to do at the start in order to do it. And then they told me on the radio and I got it right and off I went. And that was years ago. So imagine what it's like now with the
It's
complication
difficult.
of, I mean, if Mercedes can't get it right with George in terms of how much battery to have, this and that, that's I also feel sorry for George because he's a racer and like everybody else he just wants to drop the clutch and go. He doesn't want any of this nonsense, and that's what happened. It was all, I think it was related to what we saw at Spa and then trying to balance what happened at Spa with what they're going to do in Hungary, and it was a mess, complete mess. He did have a
What?
new ice, didn't he, for the race, internal combustion engine, presumably. I don't know, did they damage it maybe with that some sort
Yeah,
of fuel
yeah,
leak or whatever at the end of
yeah, there was a
qualifying?
crash. Yeah, there was a crack in the engine.
Yeah, so I don't think that's related to it. I think it's all to do with how you do with I mean, the way Kimi spoke, it was, "Oh yeah, I know not to do that." That's what he did, sort of thing. It was that. I'm not. That's paraphrasing what he said, but that was the tone of what he said, which is a bit odd, isn't it? Because you would imagine that it'd be exactly the same for both drivers in terms of the protocol of what to do with the battery and everything else. But if it's a very, very fine margin of whether you've got a full battery or a 99% full battery, we don't get to see the battery graphics anyway. So who are
No.
we to talk about this?
Mm,
But it was ridiculous, really. It's
yeah.
just, it's the sort of thing that shouldn't happen in Formula One. It shouldn't have been happening to Max all year, really, and now it's happening to George.
Do
All
you
this
think
stuff that the fans don't understand or don't want to understand because it's nonsense.
there is a legibility problem, isn't there, Peter?
Yeah,
No one knows
yeah.
anything. um, do you think George can come back from this, or is that his
I mean,
championship done
George
for
will just
20?
continue being George, and he will drive as George Russell has always driven, which is very hard, very competitive, spiky-ish compared with Kimi. And there will be some days when it'll all come right for him and he'll win Grand Prix again for sure. He'll win some races between now and the end of the year. So that's all he can do is just be George. In the same way Oscar can just be Oscar. I mean, to his George's credit, he is just staying George, isn't he? I suppose that's a good thing. I mean, there was a bit of chat before, was it before last race, I think, when he said, maybe I should look at my driving style. And then that was
Mm,
Spa, wasn't it? And then
yeah.
halfway through the weekend, he said, oh, no, it's not me.
It's
And
the
so
future.
that was that, gone. And that's a good thing because he's never, ever going to be able to drive like Kimi Antonelli, who is, he's right up there with Max when it comes to a lovely analogy that Kimi used recently. For me, a corner is like folding a handkerchief. And the immediate thing you think of is when you fold a handkerchief, it's thumb and forefinger and doing it quite delicately, make sure all the corners match, and then you iron it or whatever. And that's what you see with Kimi. It's like that as he goes into a corner. That's how he drives, and it's what I've been saying. He's very, very good on slow corners from day one, and now his task always was to be as good as that on medium and high speed corners, and he's done that beautifully this year, enhanced by the confidence that comes from winning races and giving himself. That's where winning races helps, when you know that you can do it, and then the next level just happens if you think logically. And
Mm,
like Max, he's very good at not allowing any of the crud to come in and penetrate his psyche, all the
mm,
money and the glory and the profiling and the Italian first champion since what, Alberto Ascari, all this stuff. That none of that will be there. Only thing he'll be thinking about throughout the August break will be the next race and what he's going to do into turn one or turn seven or whatever, and just thinking, keeping his feet on the ground as he keeps the four tires on the road. And that's the beauty of Kimi, and very like Max in that sense, and drives very like Max as well. I mean, really good last stint, I thought, on the hard tire. I was a bit disappointed Mercedes didn't go to the soft for him at the end, but then again, they're not Red Bull where nothing, there's nothing to lose. They are Mercedes leading the world championship, so it's a slightly different perspective. And I think you would then say, well, we'll take the conservative option. We know the hard will work and he can do the job. Podium finish in sight. He might have beaten Max on the soft tire. That's about all you can say. He could have been second rather than third, but from where he was and what he had to live with, i.e., not driving the car in FP1, losing all that time, and then, of course, the penalty in a car that wasn't great anyway. P3, very good result for him.
he's not bad, that Max fella. I read something, Peter, that um around Max going to Mercedes, that Mercedes are of the opinion now that they don't need Max Verstappen because they think Kimi and Antonelli in equal machinery, if not as of the time of writing, at the very latest next year, will at least be as quick as Max. Are you buying or selling that, Peter?
Buying 100%. If you don't want two number
Wow.
ones squabbling with one another, they're absolutely correct. I think there would be some feeling amongst the stakeholders at Mercedes that having Max and Kimi is the dream team in terms of the future and the brand, and it can only be big for the team. But if you're Toto Wolff, you definitely want to keep it as it is because you don't want that fight between Max and Kimi. And as I said when we chatted a couple of weeks ago, the problem would always be if Kimi doesn't win the championship this year and then you bring
Mm,
Max in, you've got an obligation basically to Kimi to try and win the championship. But then you've got Max Verstappen also trying to win the championship. And it makes sense to keep it exactly as it is, which leaves Max with, very few options now, apart from McLaren, which he might be feeling more warmly towards because of the work they've done on the R&D side of the car and how good it is now. And a lot of that probably is due to Rob Marshall. And we all know what the relationship's like between Max and Rob. And then, of course, you got GP going there too. So it becomes quite attractive to do the McLaren thing for Max now, especially after Hungary.
Yeah. Although all the chatter is that the most likely outcome is that he stays at Red Bull now for 2027.
Well, yeah, guess what? That's what PW was predicting
True.
in 2024, 25, when everybody was going on and on about how Max had to leave Red Bull and go to Mercedes because Christian Horner's departure the team was going to collapse. And, and then Adrian left and, oh, where's Max going to go? There's no way he's going to stay at Red Bull. And I kept saying, well, he's not going to make any decision until we're a good way into 26. And here we are. And yeah, Red Bull are not looking great, but what are the other options really, apart from McLaren now?
There are none, Peter. Sabbatical, maybe. But
maybe. I mean, I don't think it's that bad. If he can finish second. I mean, I thought it was quite funny, Max saying, I can't believe we finished second. And then you could see on the slowdown lap, he was about to say, this car was terrible today. No grip, no balance. This was bad. And he was, every time he tried to start the sentence, he stopped. He said, today the car, the car today. And then he kept realizing, well, I finished second. I better not rubbish this too much. And of course, what the reality is that a lot of other people had issues as well.
This is.
And that's the thing. And Max just kept it going, threading that needle and never, ever looked up. And every time he said this was bad or that was bad, he'd go and set a personal best lap the following lap. Classic Nigel Mansell style, against all odds.
I would love to know, Peter, as a percentage of the whole, how much of that P2 is the Red Bull car and how much was Max Verstappen just outperforming it?
Well, we should give a bit of credit to Isaac Hadjar again. Brilliant in traffic, wasn't he?
He was
as much as you can do it within the regulations.
He
was absolutely spot on in the way he held up the McLarens a bit and just generally made life a bit difficult. And he was very helpful to Max. And he's right there, and he finished sixth. So, yeah, of that P2, I would say 65%, 70% was Max, and of Hadjar's P6, I would say 55, 60% was Hadjar.
Wow.
That shows how good those two drivers are. Now, we can think of other teams where it's the car and they don't have any drivers, but that's another matter.
Of Carlos Sainz and his incursions on the progress of Oscar Piastri, Carlos after the race said that he didn't have his, in fact, the stewards or the stewards, not the marshals, the stewards said that they gave Carlos Sainz a 5-second penalty and not a 10-second penalty because his excuse was that he had zero visibility. Plus, they had to factor into the equation the fact that the blue flag system was not working. Can you absolve Carlos Sainz of all responsibility then, Peter, as far as his impeding of Oscar Piastri?
Well, I'd certainly absolve him on the perspective that it was definitely not deliberate. That's for sure. But difficult to be more lenient after that because he knew Piastri was coming. We know that from the radio transmissions, and he drove into him. And this wasn't, this wasn't going into turn one and not knowing the other driver was there because of the peripheral vision or whatever, or the lack of mirrors working. This was a tight corner with a change of direction. And knowing that a quick car is about to lap you, and nonetheless just using all the road to come back to the left, which Carlos does more than probably any other driver on the grid, just right there because he loves these wide entries, and just drives straight into Piastri. So for me, that was not a question of semantics and whether it should be 5 or 10. That was a big thing, a much bigger penalty for that. If you actually hit another car that's lapping you, that makes a nonsense of the current regulations. If all you get is a 5-second penalty, that is a really big thing to have done. And yeah, ultimately, most of the blame must fall on the shoulders of the team because obviously they weren't, if the blue flags and lights are not working, the team would know that, and they should be giving Carlos even more specific instructions. And so there's no excuse there at all. I don't know. I was just flabbergasted actually how how much trouble Carlos Sainz got into all weekend. And I just think, it began with that brake testing thing with Max into turn 12 on Friday morning. Max had suddenly had to move to the right because Carlos was, I think he was doing a slow lap or something and braked early. No idea that Max was behind him. And the similar thing happened at the end of the long straight on Saturday. So what's going on with Carlos? I can only think that it's really eating away now at him, and he's just not. He's got very little mental capacity now for thinking other than I should be in a better car. And this car's nonsense. The team's nonsense. I'm going nowhere. My career's ruined, and it's a lot of things coming into play now, which are all predictable because once he got, there's no way he should have lost that Ferrari drive. Very, very quick number two. No, it's not even correct to say that. He wasn't even a number two to Charles Leclerc. He was a wingman to Charles Leclerc, winning races and often beating Charles. Very, very good. And the minute that happened, you got to have Lewis. That's when he should have gone to Audi and given himself a completely new focus in life. That's the Audi brand. I'm with them for 10 years. Small team, growing from Sauber upwards, growing organically. Me and Nico Hulkenberg, great team, and move forward and enjoy that moment for what it is. If you're not going to be in a Ferrari, it's not a bad option. Instead of which he went to Williams, which was always going to be, for me, a dead end. And I use that phrase in the sense that it's a road with not much happening at the end of it, because it's run by a faceless bank. And look at the car. It's all predictable. And I guess it was the Mercedes engine that was the big attraction for him, and that's a mistake as well, because look at Audi now. He could have been in Bortoletto's car for sure. He could have got that drive, and he'd be, every time he was in the points, everyone would be saying, "Wow, great for Carlos, wonderful." And there's Nico in the points again. Made a mistake, and because of that, it's eating inside him. And he doesn't want to admit that, of course. Why would he? He wants to look in the mirror in the morning and think, I'm a racing driver, I'm a Formula One driver. Today it's all going to be different for me. He's got to be positive. But that does eat away. When you make decisions like that and it's a wrong decision and you're in an uncompetitive car and a team where things go wrong a lot, it does eat away if you're Carlos Sainz and you've tasted victory and you know how good you are. That's the problem. And it's showing up now with these little things, in my opinion.
Oh, Peter. What a damning indictment on decision making. Is Carlos Sainz the
Well, no,
new?
yeah, decision making, not only not going to Williams, but also Ferrari,
Mm,
deciding they don't want to work with Carlos anymore, which was a huge mistake, in my opinion.
wow. Unless Lewis Hamilton goes and bags himself
Yeah,
a
I mean, ask
championship
yourself
position.
this question: if Carlos had never left Ferrari, do you think he might have won the Spanish Grand Prix this year?
Uh, oh yeah, 100%. I mean,
Yeah,
he
and imagine how big that would have been. They talk about all the PR value for Lewis,
yeah,
and it's undoubted. But imagine Carlos winning his own home Grand Prix.
it'd be incredible though. Really incredible, but not as incredible as an eighth for Sir Lewis in the red car, maybe. I don't know.
No, there's that. But I mean, that's a long way away from where we are, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, a lot needs to happen, but anything can and usually does happen in F1. Look, as we round third, Peter, I wanted to ask you about this Bahrain Grand Prix, but not in Bahrain, of course, in Malaysia. Is this a sensible thing that F1's do there?
Absolutely. And I hope it's all because of everything we've been saying about Sepang on my channel for the last 3 years. Whenever I get a question on a live stream or anybody asks me about favorite circuits, I always put Sepang up there as one of my all-time favorite racetracks. And the whole Grand Prix, the Malaysian Grand Prix, is one of my all-time favorite races. And I'm so impressed that the FIA have obviously been, and F1 have been obviously watching my channel in great detail. I'm being facetious here. And but yeah, I couldn't be more delighted that they're going to. I'm kind of sad that Bahrain isn't there as a racetrack, because I actually quite like Bahrain as well. I think it's a good circuit. Turn 910, we know, is just a fabulous section of road. But Sepang, it was absolutely the best Tilke circuit, his first circuit as well, interestingly. And there's some great corners there. Love it. Love the whole race. I love the airport proximity, the hotels, the water nearby, the weather, the whole thing is just brilliant. I'm so pleased that we've got that race. Of course, it'll be financed by the Bahrainis, but it's we've got Sepang back. I think that's a joyous moment. Now we just need to get the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix held at a proper circuit, like, I don't know, Turkey, maybe. Wouldn't that be good?
But you don't care about the naming convention,
No,
Peter.
not at all. Any more than I cared about the Swiss Grand Prix being held at Dijon. Why was that an issue?
Fair.
I don't remember anybody who at that Grand Prix was saying, "Oh, this is terrible. How can we call this race at Dijon the Swiss Grand Prix?" I don't remember anybody saying that.
Fair,
Do
but it's
you?
not. No, agreed, Peter. But isn't there a I'm left with a sense of unease that we're having a Malaysian Grand Prix and it's not being called the Malaysian Grand Prix.
Oh
That
no,
doesn't.
no, I'm not, because if you want it called by the Malaysian Grand Prix, the Malaysian government would have had to come up with all the money to put a
Yeah,
race on, and they've got the
agreed.
best of both worlds now. They've got a Grand Prix, but they don't have to put up any money for it. It's absolutely
Fair.
brilliant. I'm so pleased for the Malaysian people. I think it's wonderful. And I
They've
hope they
won
use
lots.
this opportunity to spend lots of Middle Eastern money on rebuilding the pit area and doing everything else and making sure the
Very
whole
good shout.
thing's mega air conditioning, the grandstand, the whole thing.
It's a
I'm
good
sure they
shout.
will. Why
Yeah.
not? Good luck to them. I'm really pleased, and I think it's a brilliant thing Formula One have done there to put Sepang back on the calendar. And any racing driver with blood in his veins should be delighted about that.
That's a great shout. It's a very good shout, Peter. Legend, as per usual, Mr. Windsor. I appreciate all the time and the legendary insights. If you are not subscribed to the Peter Windsor F1 channel on YouTube, then what are you doing with your life? And on your favorite podcasting platform, the pick to click, as always, is the Short Corners podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor, hype, like, comment, and subscribe on the
And we
right.
and Cam, we
Of
got
course.
a new merch store as well.
Oh,
So if you
look at
want a
this.
T-shirt that says "Bring back V8s" or "Make corners great again," you know where to go.
There we go. The Peter D. Windsor store is available. You're a legend, Mr. Windsor. I appreciate you. On the right hand side of your screen, it is World Championship winning team manager 1992, Mr. Peter D. Windsor. I've been, as always, Cameron CC. Between now and next time, may all your sectors be purple.